All right. Anybody else got cards, questions, comments? Final call, final call. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Wait, the cue from up there.
What? Oh, I'll say the same thing to you. I said to Devin, shocking. Oh, two-sided, gracious. I think it is fair to say that none of us will ever hear any secular song that has the word glory in it again. I, of course, am partial to Bruce Springsteen, and so most of the time during the sermon, I was just singing Glory Days, and I was thinking about sitting at a bar, talking about Glory Days, and now I'm thinking, let's bring in the heavy ones.
Yeah, heavy days.
Let's bring in the heavy days.
It's just not as fun a song to sing, but you know.
No, it's not. It's not. I just want to say from my perspective that there was a lot I appreciated about the sermon. But it was so pastoral. And I think that is, that takes a level of giftedness that a lot of preachers and proclaimers don't have. And so I just want to start off by complimenting you that you had this beautiful weaving all throughout of pastoral care along with making us think. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, here is our first question. I mean, right out of the gate, y'all. I didn't read any of these beforehand. So can you explain the C.S. Lewis quote a little more? So culture is mental, humans are...
Mortal. I think it means
mortal.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. I can't read anymore. Mortal. Humans are immortal because they are God's expression here on earth.
Yeah. No, I think you got it. The quote, in a little bit more of its complexity, is Lewis kind of trying to turn us toward how, and this is the end of a very long message that he gave, like a 40-minute sermon, and he kind of turns towards how our neighbors, our friends, our family are also God's glory to us and the expression of God's glory in the world, and that we need to focus on them and how we love them. But he also is recognizing the fullness of that by saying that every day you may encounter people who are on all spectrums, from the most monstrous thing of your nightmares to the most glorious human being you've ever met. And that part of life is becoming part of the Christian journey. The walk is becoming comfortable and prepared for meeting the best and the worst of humanity in people all the time. And that our job is to try to help people walk toward the best they could possibly be and to help them move in that direction. He was also trying to compare, he was kind of saying that human beings are immortal, but not in the way that we think, like never dying, but having a sense of lasting past their death, that we carry people with us who are long gone, ancestors, grandparents, loved ones, whose impact on us is immortal, even if he is a little bit talking about, I think, the afterlife at some points in that. I mean, it's C.S. Lewis, so you can expect that from him. But he's really kind of trying to get a sense that that humanity is really the most enduring thing, the most glorious part of God's creation, and that it carries on. And he makes this kind of aside that civilizations and cultures and things that are humanly created are like gnats; they just come and go. But that people have an indelible impact on us for many generations. That's kind of what he's trying to say.
Well, in theory, I like that. The challenge I find is how in my humanness do I not do the human thing, which is, you are God's glory. You are God's glory. Not sure about you. You are God's glory. You know.
Yeah.
And so what are some practical things that we can start with by recognizing that all are God's glory and not get blindsided by, as I said in my prayer this morning, those who annoy us, those who frustrate. A couple of you complimented me on that, and I wondered if I hit a nerve. If I did, I'm sorry, I was really speaking to myself. How do we do that?
Well, that's hard. That's the goal of, trying to figure out all the parts of life, right? But I think one of the things we can do, I was at a retreat once, I probably told this story in a sermon, but I had a rabbi who was teaching us during this week-long retreat, and he made everybody who was on the retreat take on a practice on the first day where they had to walk, every time they were walking the halls and they saw someone else in the hall, they had to yell out, "Behold, the image of God is approaching."
Wow.
It was very challenging, and it was very challenging to hear people yell that at you. It's like, wow, okay, yeah. Because sometimes we don't think of ourselves as the image of God, right? And so the whole retreat we were doing that, and it got really funny, like, behold, the image of God is approaching, being sarcastic about it, being funny about it. But it left this permanent impact on me that, wow, that practice helped us think about what's real, what's actually the case, what we actually believe. And so what I was trying to get at in the sermon is kind of that could you say that to somebody who you don't really like? Could you say that to somebody who you really strongly disagree with? Do you believe that the image of God is in them? Someone who's done something horrible, something to hurt you deeply. Is it possible to say that and believe that? And that's kind of what I was trying to get at with the sermon, is that there's sort of two sides of glory, two sides of this word that give us the ability to approach it, I think, with a little bit more authenticity, because there's a weight to it. Giving glory, the act of glorifying someone, can also be a carrying of the weight of that person, a carrying of the weight of what they mean in your life, both good and bad, the burden that they lay on you. That's why I use that example that Rabbi Knight gave of glorify your mother and father. I mean, that pretty clearly helps you see the weight you have to hold of imperfect people in your life, and you yourself as a parent being an imperfect person. What would it mean for someone to glorify you as a parent, knowing you never made all the right decisions? You're not perfect. There's a weight to who you are, as well as a glory to who you are, or you might say a grandeur and a weight at the same time. So how do we hold those two things together? I think that's the key, is like, what does it mean to glorify everyone, all humanity, but to do so in a way that is not just like, well, I love everybody, which means you love no one. And to do so in a real authentic kind of way, being able to say, well, right now, I'm holding the weight of this. It's a heaviness. There's a heaviness in this relationship for me. It's still glory. And over here, there's a grandeur, a beauty, and it's glory. And both of those can be true at the same time.
Thank you. All right, in light of your recent sermon and your recent podcast, Creativity in Crisis, I talked to one of my friends about it and asked, if you were to imagine your life and to paint it as a picture, what color would you use and what would be in the painting? They responded, I would be afraid to draw it for the fear that it would never be, that I would not do the picture justice. There's this fear in me too, and desire, a desire to have a life that matters, but also be afraid that weight of it is so strong I could not lift it with my fingers, that I would disassociate and treat it as nothing. There is a relief when it doesn't matter, or when there was no weight to words or dreams. So I guess my question is, what picture would you draw? What would you dream? What would the painting look like? How do we approach this fear of glory like the people had when they brought the ark back, but they left it alone?
What a question. That's very many parts to that question. One of the things that I think about, this person clearly listened to the podcast that we gave, and Mia preached about Station 11 last week, a show that is dear to both of us. And one of the quotes from that show is, that really resonates to me is, I don't want to live the wrong life and then die. I don't want to live the wrong life and then die. And it's like a really deep philosophical thing, and it's also kind of simple, don't live the wrong life. But it's also very philosophical, and what that quote prompts people to do is to make decisions to stop living the life that they're living and change and go in a different direction. Or to reconsider the choices that they made. How did they end up in the life they had? Is the life they have the life, the right life, or the wrong life? What is the right life? How do you think about that? And that also, but the beauty of the question is that there's so much responsibility in it that the person is taking on. I don't want to live. They're taking it very personally. I don't want to live. They're not saying, I don't want somebody to make me live the wrong life and then die. They're saying, I don't want to live the wrong life and then die. I personally am going to take responsibility for it. So I think that has to, but I love the fact that the question acknowledges the weight of that philosophical statement. It's not easy to decide you're going to try to live a different life or a right life or whatever that means, and to make some kind of decision, which even no matter what age you are, is hard, but it gets harder the older that you get to make that change, to make a change in your life. So much has occurred, you don't feel like you've got enough days left. What does it matter now at this point? I'm already retired or whatever. So I think it gets more courageous the older you get to try to make a pivot like that. And we're living in a culture where we need a lot of people in that older baby boomer generation to make some changes. And it's going to take a lot of courage. So I think we need to understand and have some empathy for the weight that is required of that kind of shift that is needed there. And what does it mean to have some empathy for that as we live our lives? Yeah, I think if I was to paint a picture, what would I paint? What colors would I paint? I think I would paint a picture. I would always use blue. That's one of my favorite colors. But I think I would paint a picture knowing that it would be a stamp in time of what my life is, and something that is ever unfolding. A picture can only capture a moment. And while there might be 1,000 words in it, it's not all of my life. So it's just one picture. And that picture is going to unfold itself in different ways, and I'm going to need to paint it again. And then I'm going to need to paint it again at each successive thing. And so I would imagine it to be an exercise that is important for us to do so that we can take stock and give gratitude for what our lives are, but also something that I'd need to do multiple times. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm coming back to a couple different things in that. I loved your idea of, as we get older, it becomes more challenging. But I think for me, the challenge is, well, I don't have these letters before my name, these letters after my name, this number of zeros in the bank account, this, whatever the thing. And then I think about the question from towards the end of Confronting Whiteness, which is, who is your sphere of influence? Mm-hmm. And so thinking about, if I have this, sphere of 20 people that I have influence over, which is also weighty, right? Mm-hmm. How am I showing up, and what does that picture look like? I think it would, for me, it would be different pictures. Mm-hmm.
Well, the trick of glory is that we have delusions of grandeur, like I talked about from the Brooks article this week about the mass shooters and his sort of argument that mass shooters are moving toward delusions of grandeur. All of us have that, maybe not to the extent that someone who takes on the decision to kill people takes on, but all of us do that. I do that, and I notice myself doing that when I start to begin to think about the problems in the world, and that's where the heaviness comes from. I start thinking, well, what am I going to do about the Supreme Court? There's nothing I can do. I mean, there's things I can do, but there's really nothing I can do. I mean, there's like this like balancing of the stuff in my power that I can do, and then there's stuff that's not in my power to do, and I really just want to wave a magic wand and make it change. And when I realize I can't really do that, then I feel a sense of paralysis and frustration about it that sends me into apathy and indifference and no action at all. So I think where what I did at the end of Confronting Whiteness was to try to help people who, all of us have these delusions of grandeur, and we want to fix the Supreme Court, we want to end mass shootings, we want to solve all the problems in the world with a flick of a switch or with a vote for the president. Not that we don't need to vote, we need to vote, but just something like a snap. And that's just not going to happen. That's not the way it works. It requires lots of labor and organizing and movement building and time and energy and power building. So I think, well, okay, so how do we really take responsibility for our lives? Well, we really take responsibility for our lives when we begin to understand our sphere of power. Where is our sphere of power in the world? Is that your family, your neighborhood, your where you live? Is that your friend group, your church, your school? Get really local, get really specific into your life, and then think, what does it mean to take responsibility for your power in that sphere of influence and power? You can influence people in your sphere. Don't try to, I mean, you could call your senator, good, do that, but also who's in your life around you right now in that sphere of power. And I always tell these stories that came out of Confronting Whiteness that are so powerful now. We had a church member, I don't want to brag on her too much here publicly, but you know, she's, at first when she went through the course, she was like, well, what can I do? You know, I'm a stay-at-home mom raising 2 young children. My husband's going off to work. I don't have any power. Well, then she realized she had power in her neighborhood. And she decided to go on this Nextdoor community app that they have. Do y'all know Nextdoor, what it is, right? It's like a neighborhood community app. Well, that's the most racist place in America. Nextdoor is one of the most racist places in America. And so she decided, I'm going to show up on Nextdoor all the time. I'm going to monitor it because I can have time to do that. And I'm always going, if somebody tries to call the police on a black person just for walking through my neighborhood, I'm going to confront my neighbor about that. And I'm going to say, don't call the police. I will go out and talk to them. You know, or don't call the police. That's John. We know John. Now, that may seem really simple and small. So what, right? She may save people's lives. She may keep one person from having one less encounter with police, and that may be the one where they die, right? Just like the story of I mentioned of the man who was shot in the back 60 times, unarmed black man, shot by police in the back. One interaction with police, and she may save this. And the other thing is, it's costly. This is where the weight is. She has found that on the one hand, she's been able to build a cadre of neighbors who have come along with her and are now this group who've gone through the course and they're working together, so she's got some strength. She's not getting invited to the dinner parties anymore of the neighborhood. She's not getting invited to the homeowners association meetings. Her kids aren't allowed to play with certain neighbors. Why? Nobody likes the fact that she's showing up on Nextdoor and telling them, you know, don't do this, you know? And I share that as a story. You know, there was another one, that's a young person, right? That's a young mother. There was another group, and it was a retired woman and her husband, and she was like, I don't really know, you know, do I have power? I'm retired. And then she thought about it for a little bit, and she said, you know, I'm the matriarch of my family. I'm the matriarch of my family. My children listen to me. My children's spouses listen to me because I'm the matriarch of the family. So we're going to start talking about this all the time, every time we're together. Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner. This isn't important. I want to talk about whiteness with our grandkids. We're going to talk about anti-racism with our children. It's going to be a part of our lives. And so she's going to make a change in the lives of those people who'll be encountering things they would have never encountered otherwise. Again, it really seems small, but like back to the sermon that Miller referenced from Tara, it's the small things. Start with the little things where you can make a difference in your own sphere of power and influence. And then you'll really start to see what responsibility looks like. Because it's much harder to go into those areas and do that work than it is to call your senator. Doesn't mean you shouldn't call your senator. but it's much harder to tell your neighbors not to call the police than it is to call your senator, than it is to rail about the Supreme Court, than it is to go on Twitter or Instagram or anywhere on social media and give a big tirade, which we all do, but it's easier to do that, right? They call that slacktivism, right? Not activism, but slacktivism. The slacktivism is fine, but then there's also real responsibility taking, a real accounting and analysis of your own power and a way of changing and using your power to make the world a better place.
And you know what I love about both of those stories is that there was literally no pennies involved.
Right. Didn't even record.
You're not, I mean, you know, because I think that's where a lot of us get worried is, well, I don't have, you know, I can't give $10,000 to whatever, you know, reproductive justice group or Freedom School, et cetera, et cetera. But you can show up to be a drop everything and read reader at Freedom School.
Right.
You can, if you've not been on Nextdoor, you really should.
I don't know, it's pretty rough.
It is rough. You gotta like be prepared. Because, you know, what I see, and I don't live in a, you know, very expensive part of Charlotte at all. And I still see things like, and on my side of town, they started off by saying, I really hate to post this, but then don't post it. Now, fortunately, I see a lot of lost dogs, lost kids. Someone stole my lawnmower. But it is a matter of just saying, this is what I can do.
Yeah. It's the problem with Nextdoor is that the most basic and primitive fears of average human beings are wrought large for everyone to see. And the biggest danger is that Nextdoor becomes a kind of deputized local community policing. And each of these people on Nextdoor deputize themselves to create safety and security for their neighborhood, not having any conception of the consequences that may have for people around them. Just thinking through everything as this is my territory, this is my home, and I'm going to protect it at all costs, and not really having an analysis of how that your home and your neighborhood fits into the larger understanding of the world, and what impact you may have on somebody who you call the police on who may just be going for a walk or a jog, like Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, we could tell the stories here 1,000 times. Those were in neighborhoods just like the neighborhoods we live in here in Charlotte, where things like that happen. And so it really is about saving people's lives at this point. And it's important for us to wrestle with those, you know, and, you know, so.
Okay, so we're going to make a shift.
Okay.
Can you talk more about the symbolism of the ark? A lot of commentary suggests that Israel had an almost superstitious or idolatrous view of the ark because they relied on the ark instead of God directly. Do you view the ark as being the actual glory of God? Any thoughts are appreciated.
No, that's really...
The only thing I'm going to say about this, no reference to Indiana Jones.
I know.
I'm just going to chalk it up to age.
Some people think the ark is still there, out there somewhere, like in Ethiopia in a cave or something, right? So there's all these myths about the ark. So let's deconstruct this a little bit. So the ark, God tells the Israelites to build this. So it's not like it's not connected. It's not like the golden calf. Okay, so it's not an idolatrous symbol from the start, at least. Like the golden calf was. God tells the Israelites to build this, and what does he tell them to put in the ark? It's like a tent, right? It's like a big tent, and you carry it or whatever. And at first, like we think of it as like this golden chest, right, with like seraphim. No. It was all that plus a tent over the top of it. You know, so it looked massive as it was being carried with the army, not just like a little gold thing, right? So it had all this around it that made it look huge. And inside, though, inside the cabinet, covered around by cherubim and seraphim, were the tablets on which the law was written. So in Jewish tradition, the law is the most sacred thing. It's the most sacred communication of God to the people. And so these 10 commandments, the 2 tablets of the Decalogue, are there in the covenant. So this is why it's so sacred. It has the primary communication of God to the people, and then God tells them to build it, right? And sanctify it. The other way it starts to get more sacred, and you can buy this or not if you want to, is that people touch it casually and just drop dead. So that's where the Indiana Jones stuff comes in. That's fun. But so Phineas and Hophni in this story, after carrying the ark and having it stolen from them, also, died. And then, of course, that leads to the sort of the conclusion where Phineas's wife dies in childbirth, giving birth to this Ichabod, this where is God's glory, this new Israel where they have lost the ark. So I think in the Hebrew tradition, at this time, coming out of the age of the judges and sort of transitioning from the age of the judges into the age of the priests, Eli, then Samuel, and then from priest to prophet and priest to king, all that's happening in the same period of time. You have still, like most of the judges, just rampant corruption. That's where Eli's sons are just totally corrupt, totally wicked, horrible. I don't know how they made the decision to let them carry the ark, but it was clearly a poor one, and it did not go well. So I like to think that they just took it upon themselves. That's the kind of people that they were. If you read about them, they're just horrible. The way that the Hebrew people believed was that God had literally decided to tabernacle among them. And the word tabernacle is important because that's what they built over the ark. That God had decided to take up residence, like the incarnation, to take up residence among them. And so that's why God had said, I'm there. God had said this multiple, that's me, I'm there. It doesn't mean that God wasn't everywhere else, but that I'm going to have a specific kind of presence in that place. I'm going to be tabernacled among you in that spot. And so if you go back and read this story in 1 Samuel 4, which is really, it's actually very interesting. If you have time today, go back and read it. At first, the Israelites go into battle and they lose, right? They lose a little bit, and so then they don't really lose that badly, but then they fear that they're going to lose badly, so they run get the ark. No one tells them to do it. They run go get the ark, and then they bring the ark into battle. Well, and then the ark coming into battle with them makes them feel really proud. That's where the earth shakes when they scream. The Philistines are more afraid than they are anywhere else in Scripture. Right there, they're shaking in their boots. They think they're going to die. They think they're going to be captured and put into slavery, right? And then, of course, we find out that Phineas and Hophni are the ones carrying the ark, and the Philistines rout the Israelites, destroy them, and take the ark. So it's kind of a big turn of events situation. You think the Israelites are going to win. They lose. The ark is taken. It's good dramatic theater. You think about it as in terms of a movie, it would be pretty interesting. And so the whole point of the story is to try to make a claim that Israel has not been living up to the commandments, the 10 commandments that God is giving them, and has been disrespecting the presence of God among them, and therefore God's glory departed from them in a rather dramatic fashion. Not just the ark being stolen, but the chief priest and his 2 children dying, and then the chief priest's son, Phineas, his wife, dying in childbirth, birthing a child with the name, Where is God's Glory? So it's a rather dramatic scene unfolding that kind of gives us this sense that Israel is not in a good situation. But later, is the glory of God still with the ark? So much happens in Israelite history that over time that they eventually build synagogues. They eventually build first they eventually build a temple, and then that's really where God dwells. No longer, because the ark goes in the temple, right? So things evolve over time. Where God's presence is most located or most sacred evolves over time.
So I'm going down a crazy rabbit hole here.
Yeah.
And I'm so embarrassed that I'm going to ask this question.
Don't be embarrassed.
All right, so the Philistines became who? In history,
Actually, the Philistines were originally like the sea peoples. You can read about them in ancient Greece. They just kind of appeared out of nowhere. No one really knows where they came from, and just wreaked havoc all over the Mediterranean, and eventually died out and were destroyed by the Israelites. Well, at least once we think. one section of the Philistines were killed by the Israelis.
So I think what's so interesting is, as you said, you can go back through and read through Israelite history, that one of the challenges that we have is that when these groups of people died out, their stories died out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Syro-Phoenicians, so many different groups that we don't have. I mean, you can go back and research their stories, but usually they get assimilated into another larger group as a part of history, or are conquered and completely destroyed. We know that story here in America.
Right.
Tribes that were completely, wiped off the face of the earth. Yeah.
So it's just where I go with these things sometimes is, so what would their history say about when they captured the ark?
Oh, I'm sure it would say good things, positive things, yes. Yeah.
So
They would be very proud of themselves.
You want to write a short story about that.
Yeah.
In your free time this afternoon. Okay, those are all of our formal questions, and we have time for one, for sure.
Yeah.
Come to the mic question.
Thank you for that. That was a very challenging and interesting sermon, and I thank you for it. I am concerned about the Philistines because the Revised Common Lectionary Gospel lesson this week was about the Samaritan, who was my neighbor. And it turned out to be a Samaritan who were pretty obnoxious people, according to Jesus' crowd. And I think the Philistines were pretty obnoxious people as far as the Jews were concerned. So how do we breach this? It struck me that as you were preaching, that Catholic churches in Charlotte today are probably jubilant about the Supreme Court.
Right. Yeah.
They're probably saying, this is great. As Leonard Cohen once said, destroy another fetus now, we don't like children anyhow. That kind of brutal wording about abortion. That there are a lot of devout Christians, people who really believe that they're saving the lives of babies.
Yeah.
That they are jubilant today. And they're our neighbors.
Yeah.
And so how the dickens do we get along with them? I mean, we can get in the pulpit and rail against white Christian nationalism. And maybe it's the white Christian nationalists who are the ones that are championing, taking away women's rights. But how do we breach this divide? As Christian people, how do we deal with the Philistines other than going out trying to kill them and having them kill us? And today the metaphor of us being in silos, that we're the red church, we're the blue church over here, but there are red churches around us. We're supposed to be Christians together, but obviously we have a lot of dissatisfaction with our brothers and sisters. So how do we get across that? How do we love our neighbors if they're Philistines or if they're Samaritans?
Good question. Ooh, there are a lot of, I'm seeing Gerardo laughing at me because there's a lot of scholars out here who are trying their best to try to figure this out. And I haven't seen a lot of great answers, to be honest, yet. I mean, there's just I think we're in a period of an analysis of what's going on, trying to figure out what's happening, why we're so divided, and trying to catch up with how fast we've become divided and how much more quickly we got divided than we were. We were divided and then we got more and more and more divided. And we're in this period of analyzing that. But there's not a lot of really good answers that I've seen yet about, how to cross that bridge or bring people under a big tent or move forward as a country. Most people have just said, the die is cast, the divisions are obvious, move forward and hope to God your side wins. And it's pretty dark. That's pretty dark. But it's also, I don't know, like I think when our grandchildren and great-grandchildren or people 100 years from now look back at the time that we're in now, what are they going to look at it and compare it to? And I don't know that we're not in a very unprecedented time of tumult in world history, let alone American history. I start to think about what other times in our history can you imagine things like this occurring. Not sure we have many of them in American history. I could look around the world and think of them. I think about things like the Reformation. I mean, that time period in world history was basically one of the most bloody time periods. We think about it as so great and wonderful that we now have Martin Luther and new churches and we can all be free to read the Bible by ourselves. That was another time where the church had decided we are just against each other. We just disagree so vehemently, I will kill you if you don't agree with me, period. I mean, between Catholics, Protestants, I mean, that's where the Baptists came from, right? They were literally baptizing our people upside down until they drowned because they didn't believe in infant baptism, right? And then there were the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the wars of Europe that led to eventually people, not the wealthy people in Europe, but the people who'd been oppressed, scrambling to get across the ocean to come over here and start something new because they were just done with war. Well, they carried all that European baggage with them. All of it's still here. And we still believe that it's okay to kill each other if we disagree about religion, right? We still believe that, you know? It's the one thing that we like. It's a few things. Family and religion are like the things, maybe nation here in America. Family, religion, nation are the things we think, if you disagree with me about that, I'll kill you, you know? And I think we're in another similar position on this. And I think unity, reconciliation, all these things are really laudable goals. I wonder if it's too far gone. I know that doesn't sound very hopeful, but I fear we may be in an apocalyptic kind of moment. I read a thread that Gerardo posted last night, 2 days ago. It made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It's basically about sheriffs preparing to deputize militia groups in their counties to police their areas. Sheriffs deputizing local white nationalist militia groups in their counties across the country, and that this has been a part of a plan, a long, big plan, as a part of taking over the country, protecting guns, protecting property, protecting. It was the kind of thing where you read it and you think, is that really possible? And the only thing that could possibly come to mind that reminds me of that is like Hitler's brown shirts in 1929, 25, and 26. I mean, it's just like these roving gangs beating up communists in local neighborhoods. You know, it's apocalyptic to me. We've never seen anything like it in American history except maybe the Civil War. And in that case, you know, it was states, you know, that split up. I fear that we're headed, like, I don't know that we really understand how deep the division is. I mean, I think your question is, from a Christian perspective, it's the question we should be asking. Is there a chance we can bring this back together? But I also wonder if people who think that, I don't think you think this way, Ed, but I think people who think that can be simply done haven't come to grips with how divided it is. And I don't have any easy answers for you about it. I mean, I think in the end of the day, for Christian people, it may come down to, you know, are you willing to kill him? That may be the love that you can show, is just don't kill people. Just don't kill. I mean, if that's all you can do from a perspective of love, that could at least prevent something. But I mean, I'm wondering how far we are. Are we too far gone on this? You know, are you going to convert white Christian nationalists back to a different version of Christianity? I haven't seen a lot of success stories on that. You know, where does this all end is a question that I wonder. And how do we, more important than all that, right? Another person I saw writing about this was thinking, this is like Revelation, right? And she was just saying, we need to keep remembering that we need to live through this. It's about being nonviolent, trying to figure out how to patiently endure through the tribulation that we're in. How do we remain faithful and endure together as we walk through this? And remember, in Revelation, 7 different churches. Each one was determined who was really faithful, right? Some were in the middle, they were lukewarm, God spit them out. Some over here had completely gone over to idolatry. Others over here were faithful. And it was sort of a constellation looking at the churches during this apocalyptic moment that John was seeing during a persecution in Asia Minor. And John was saying, like, this is how it's all falling out. There are people over here that have decided they're going toward Rome. They're just going to worship Caesar. and go forward with the Roman Empire. This is the white Christian nationalist side. Side over here, some faithful people. And then there's a bunch of people in the middle who God clearly doesn't have a lot of good feelings for, the Laodiceans, who are, God spits them out of God's mouth. That feels a lot like where we are. And so there's biblical precedent for that too. That's kind of scary. To your point about Samaritans, I think, again, that's another example of a religious groups. Israel, the people of Israel, Jewish people, and the Samaritans were once all together. And then Ahab's kingdom happened, Ahab and Jezebel, and they created a new mountain where they said, this is where we now worship God. And people went with them, King Ahab and Jezebel, over to that new mountain to worship God. Now, many Jewish people thought they were completely blasphemous to go over to the new mountain. Some of them went over there just so that Ahab and Jezebel wouldn't kill them. But they went over there, and that's what became the Samaritans, worshiping on a different mountain. And then all the way up into Jesus' day, they were still worshiping on that other mountain. Well, who cares what mountain we worship on? And that's what Jesus was saying to the woman at the well, also a Samaritan. Who cares where you worship? We're all going to worship the living God, not these dead gods. Who cares where you worship? And this was revelatory for her and made a connection for her, and she was able to bring that message to her people. It was a message of grace to the Samaritans that you're included, you're a part of this group, regardless of if we've argued with each other for 500 years. I still love you. I still want you to be a part of this community. Maybe a message of radical love like the one Jesus gave to the Samaritan woman is the kind of thing that's going to be required here to change people's hearts. But I don't know. I think it's a pretty dark situation. Yeah. Not to leave you with something dark. Yeah.
Yes. So, Ed, when you started asking that question, I'm just going to share this little story from my first church, which was truly a purple church, and sat in a county seat in Georgia. And the future governor of Georgia was a longtime member of this church, along with, me. So we started doing all these ecumenical things around the town and then flowing into Atlanta a little bit because we had no Muslims in our town. We just didn't. But one of the associate pastors said one day, he said, here we are, we're doing all this amazing great work with the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Episcopalians, and even our Muslim siblings, but we will not even acknowledge our Baptist siblings that are right next door. Mm. And it's because of that.
Yeah, you're my worst enemy.
You're my worst enemy.
I'd rather talk to a Muslim than another Baptist.
Yes.
It's like the joke. It's like the joke where they're on the bridge. Do y'all know this joke? The guy's on the bridge. He's getting ready to jump off, and he says, "Don't jump off. I know we have something in common here. Let's talk together. Are you a person of faith?" And the guy says, "You know this joke? Come on."
No, this is good. End this on a joke.
Yeah, he says, "I'm a person of faith too." He's like, "Oh yeah, well, what are you?" "Well, I'm Christian." He's the guy getting ready to jump off the bridge. Says, "Well, I'm Christian too." The guy says, "Well, where do you go to church?" He goes, I go to this Baptist. I'm Baptist. I've always been a Baptist my whole life." The guy says, "Oh, I'm Baptist too." He says, "Well, what Baptist church?" "Well, we're Southern Baptist." "Oh, are you Southern Baptist?" He says, "Yes, I'm Southern Baptist too." "Look how much we have in common." He's like, "Are you Southern Baptist, Faith and Message 1965? Or are you Southern Baptist Message 1984? And the guy says, "Oh, well, I'm 1984. And the guy says, "Die, heretic," and pushes him off the bridge. Right? That's the joke. That's kind of the ridiculousness of religious difference. I think we get caught up in doctrine. We get caught up in you must be a horrible person if you believe that. And I think again, it can't lead to death. We can't be killing people because of their religion. And I think we've got to have some boundaries. Here's the balance. Here's where we got to walk. I'll leave us with some hope. There has to be accountability for people who we believe, and I don't know that there's a right or wrong in this, but who we believe have interpreted the gospel wrongly in a way that is harming people. We have to be able to have some fraternal accountability there. We have to be able to stand up and say, that's not what I read, that's not love, that's not what I think Jesus teaches. Here's a different vision. Here's what I think Jesus calls us to love the oppressed, the poor, to care for them. I can show you all these texts. I can show you where I believe it. I can show you scholars who support that. I can show you the arc of the whole Bible and how it goes there. And I think you should also be over here, because if you follow Jesus, you should also care about the poor and oppressed. And here's how I think that's playing out in society. We should be able to have those kind of conversations. We should be able to put up accountability where we tell people, I think you're lost if you think Jesus would want to have an M16. I think you're lost. I don't think Jesus would want to have an AR-15. I just think you're lost if you think that. And how did you get there? Because that's not the Bible that I read. I think we should be able to have boundaries and accountability. But if that means that they think Jesus has an AR-15 and that I should kill them, then that's a problem. Like, there's got to be a line where we say, regardless of my disagreement with you, and I vehemently do think this group of people, I believe, are trying to destroy our democracy. I really think there's a clearly organized plot and plan to change America. And at the same time, I don't think they should be murdered. I don't think they should be rounded up and hung. I don't think that's the solution. Now, they probably think that about me, but that doesn't mean that I also have to think that about them. I think we've got to be able to say, if we really do believe in Jesus, and we really want to follow Jesus, then non-resistance is the end goal. Doesn't mean non-accountability. There can be accountability without violence. There can be accountability without murder. And that's where we've got to figure out how to do that before it's too late, you know.
Amen.
Okay, amen.
All right, thanks, y'all. Have a
There you
great
go.
week.